Danielle Colby was used to living life at full pace. She was always on the go, whether she was digging for hidden antiques, filming American pickers, or touring the country to acquire unique items. She was never one to take it easy, and the world felt like a big playground for her. But that day, everything was different. The accident happened on a beautiful, quiet morning. Danielle was looking forward to a quiet day off. She wanted to see an old acquaintance, walk through the park, and maybe even have some peaceful time away from the normal filming noise. The streets of Chicago were vacant, and the sun shone through the trees as she drove through them. She hummed sweetly along to her favorite songs, not knowing that this peaceful journey might be the final one for a time. Something went awry all of a sudden. Danielle's automobile turned suddenly, and she tightened her grip on the wheel as she tried to get it back under control. In a split second, she collided with a curb, and the next thing she knew, the world was spinning. The sound of metal crunching and glass shattering filled the air as her automobile smashed into a telephone pole. Her head wrenched back forcefully, and everything went black. When Danielle awoke, she was in an unknown environment. Her head ached tremendously, her body was bruised, and there was an incredible pain in her arm. She tried to move, but her left elbow screamed in anguish. Her arm seemed as though it was stuck in place, unresponsive to her directions. Confusion clouded her head as she struggled to make sense of what had transpired. Voices shouted out to her from a distance, but they were muted. The next thing she knew, paramedics were racing around her, securing her on a stretcher. The ride to the hospital was a blur, the sirens shrieking in her ears as her reality tilted in and out of focus. The emergency department was frantic. Her injuries were severe. Doctors swiftly assessed the damage. Her elbow had been crushed in many places, and the bone was broken beyond healing at the moment. Other contusions and internal injuries were just as alarming. They would need to operate, but there was no certainty of a full recovery. The journey ahead would be long, difficult, and uncertain. Her family, friends, and co-stars gathered in the waiting area, their faces furrowed with dread. Mike Wolf and Frank Fritz, her American Pickers colleagues, were among the first to arrive, their concern apparent. Danielle's family gripped tight to each other, their nerves raw, anxiously waiting for any update. It was hours before Danielle's doctor spoke to the family. The outlook was gloomy. They needed to wait for the swelling to recede, but the outlook was unclear. They spoke about months of therapy, with no assurances of a total return to the life Danielle had known. Mike, Frank, and Jody, her best friend, exchanged uneasy glances, each striving to find the proper words. Danielle's journey to recovery had barely begun, yet already it seemed overwhelming. The pain of the accident had fractured her physically, but the uncertainty of what the future would hold fractured her emotionally. The woman who had once been unstoppable now faced an uncertain future. The initial days after the disaster were terrible. Danielle's body was bruised, swollen, and stiff. Her left arm was covered in a huge, hefty cast. She couldn't move it without intense anguish going through her body. There were simple things she could no longer do on her own. Brush her hair, eat with her dominant hand, tie her shoes. Basic actions that had once been second nature now felt like enormous challenges. Mike visited her every day, offering consolation, but his customary cheerfulness felt hollow in the sterile hospital room. Frank dropped by, trying to lighten the mood with jokes, but even he could feel the depth of Danielle's frustration. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her capacity to do anything she set her mind to. But suddenly, she was compelled to beg for help with even the simplest of activities. It hurt her pride, and the physical anguish was only amplified by the emotional toll of feeling like a stranger in her own body. Weeks passed, and Danielle moved from the hospital to a rehabilitation clinic. The physical rehabilitation sessions began, each one a harsh reminder of her limits. The therapists pushed her to move, to focus on regaining little motions, but every attempt felt like an uphill battle. She grappled with the frustration of not being able to control her body the way she once did. The anguish was relentless, and the thought of not being able to recuperate entirely gnawed at her. Some days, the thought of quitting up crossed her mind, but she kept pushing forward, if only to show to herself that she was stronger than she felt. During the rigorous days of recuperation, Danielle found herself buried in her thoughts. She had always been defined by her ability to go after what she desired. Her enthusiasm for antiques, her ambition to succeed, these things were ingrained in who she was. But now, as she sat in a sterile treatment room with her arm immobilized, she was forced to confront a different aspect of herself. The part of her that wasn't in control, that couldn't push forward no matter how hard she tried. The emotional weight of it all was enormous, and on certain days, she didn't know if she had the strength to keep going. She began to withdraw, cutting herself off from the world outside. Her relatives and friends could sense the changes in her, how her light had darkened. Jody was the one who sat with her most often, offering words of consolation, but nothing seemed to break through Danielle's walls. She was scared of what she would have to accept, that she may never be the same again. But then something altered. It wasn't a big breakthrough, but it was something. Danielle had always been a warrior, and over time, she began to recapture tiny triumphs. She lifted her arm an inch, then two. She tightened her fist. It was agonizing, yet each small motion seemed like an accomplishment. Slowly, she started to feel like herself again, even if only a little. Her family rallied around her. Mike and Frank never stopped visiting. They would joke around, reminding her of the times they'd spent picking together, and slowly, Danielle began to smile. They chatted about the future, about how she would be out on the road again, but this time, with a new appreciation for the basic act of pushing forward. Months passed, and Danielle's arm regained much of its mobility. The physical therapy was still uncomfortable, but the progress was evident. Each small movement was a reminder of her strength, and with every passing day, the worry of being irreparably broken vanished. Danielle returned to work, her arm still healing, but now with a fresh feeling of purpose. She wasn't the same person she had been before the disaster. She had learned to respect the effort it took to get up after falling, to continue onward even when the road seemed unknown. The day she picked up her first item again, a little antique bought at a local thrift shop, was one of the most emotional moments of her recovery. It was a simple gesture, but to her, it meant something far more. It was a symbol of her perseverance, of her ability to reconstruct herself, piece by piece. Danielle's journey wasn't over. There were still struggles ahead, always days when the weight of what had happened felt terrible. But she had learned something powerful. Recovery wasn't simply about the bodily mending. It was about reclaiming the aspects of herself that had been lost, about finding strength in vulnerability, and about going on with a deeper respect for life's unexpected turns. The path to recovery had been long and traumatic, but Danielle was no longer defined by the event. She was defined by her fight to heal, her willingness to keep moving even when everything inside her shouted to quit. And that, more than anything, was what made her stronger than she had ever been. The morning sunlight spilled through the window of Danielle's apartment, spreading long shadows over the floor. Her chamber was peaceful, but for the faint hum of city life beyond. It had been weeks since the accident, and she had spent most of her days either lying in bed or sitting in a wheelchair, the weight of her broken body pushing down on her. Today, however, she felt a sense of heaviness she hadn't experienced before. 4 days now, her body had been slowly recuperating, the physicians informing her that the physical treatment would take time. But today, the notion of another lengthy day of therapy was overwhelming. Danielle stared down at her casted arm, still immobilized. The ache in her elbow, albeit reduced by medication, was always present. It wasn't simply the physical discomfort anymore, it was the emotional weight of her predicament. She thought back to the woman she used to be, confident, always in charge, going after rare antiques and savoring every moment on the road with Mike and Frank. Now, she felt distanced from that existence, as though it had all been a dream. In the solitude of her flat, she found herself wondering if she would ever be the same again. Can I still do this? She thought. Can I go back to work? Can I go back to being the person I was? Her phone buzzed on the bedside table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Mike, as it often was. She gazed at the screen, hesitating before unlocking her phone. Mike had been checking on her every day, offering support, and even sending hilarious videos to brighten her mood. "You've got this, Danny. We all believe in you." She smiled softly at the message, but her heart felt melancholy. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she began to type a response. She had been avoiding her friends and family more lately, feeling ashamed by her emotions. She didn't want people to perceive her as weak, but they could all see something was wrong. They were all expecting for her to snap out of it, to return to being the strong, independent lady they knew. But that woman felt so far away. She typed back a brief message. "Thanks, Mike. I'm trying, but it's hard." A few moments passed before Mike answered with another message, his words more serious now. "I get it, Danny, but I'm not going anywhere. We're all here for you. Just take it one day at a time, okay?" The earnestness in his remarks brought a lump to her throat. For the first time in a while, Danielle allowed herself to feel the warmth of his words, to let herself imagine that maybe she wasn't as alone as she had felt. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on her door. Danielle had been anticipating a delivery, but when she answered the door, it wasn't a gift that stood there. It was Frank. His typical grin was replaced with a troubled, knowing face as he stepped into the room. "Hey, stranger," Frank remarked with a quiet giggle, trying to lighten the mood. Danielle forced a faint grin as he sat down alongside her. "Hey, Frank. What's up?" Frank hesitated a while before speaking, his look softer than usual. "I just wanted to check in on you. How are you truly doing?" Danielle squirmed uneasily in her chair, her gaze lowering to the ground. "I don't know, Frank. I'm trying to get well, but I don't know how to go past this feeling. I don't feel like myself anymore." Frank didn't immediately answer. He sat in silence, letting her words sink in the air. It wasn't like Frank to be silent, but he recognized that sometimes silence was the best response. "You know, I was thinking about that time we picked that one old barn," Frank finally replied, breaking the silence. "You were so excited about those antique bicycles, and the way you lit up when you found that mint-condition saddle. You were unstoppable back then." Danielle smiled faintly, the memories bringing back a small spark of the woman she once was. "Yeah, I remember that. It felt like a win. The adrenaline, it felt good." "That's because you had passion, Danny," Frank added. "And I know that passion is still there. It's just buried right now. But you'll dig it up. You always do." Danielle gazed up at him, her eyes moist with unshed tears. "But what if I can't, Frank? What if I'm not the same person anymore? What if I can't do the things I used to do?" Frank's voice softened, a calm confidence in his words. "You're still the same person, Danny. It could take time, but you'll find your way back. I believe in you. We all do." A few days later, Danielle returned to her physical therapy sessions. It had been hard to generate the confidence, but with Frank's words resonating in her thoughts, she was determined to try. The therapist greeted her with a nod, and as they began the session, Danielle's body felt rigid and uncooperative. But slowly, she started pushing through the discomfort. At first, the motions were small, just a slight bend of her fingers, a delicate rotation of her wrist. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Every movement was an effort, and the pain often made her question if it was worth it. But something inside her began to alter. As the weeks passed, she noticed herself making progress. Her arm got somewhat less stiff, the agony became a little more manageable. And with each modest win, her belief in herself strengthened, even if it was just a spark. A month later, Danielle returned to the set of American Pickers. Her arm was still in a sling, and her movements were slower, but she was determined to show that she hadn't been defeated. The staff welcomed her back with wide arms, and her heart overflowed with thankfulness. Mike was the first to welcome her. "Look at you," he murmured, a grin on his face. "You're back." Danielle couldn't help but smile, her eyes moistening with emotion. "Yeah, I'm back," she said softly. "It feels good." As the cameras began to roll, Danielle stepped back into the familiar persona she had always known. Picking through antiques, hunting for treasures and reconnecting with her passion for the hunt. There was a worried tension in her, but she pushed it aside, letting the old spark return. For the first time in months, she felt alive again. A few weeks later, Danielle found herself back in the field, selecting antiques with Mike and Frank. The weather was wonderful, and the joy of discovering buried treasures filled her with the same adrenaline she had once had. She crouched down, carefully scrutinizing an ancient piece of furniture in a barn. Her hand traced the wood surface, feeling the grain beneath her fingers. A sensation of tranquility flooded over her. This was what she loved, what had kept her going all these years. Danielle stood up, gazing over at Mike and Frank. "You know," she added, a new resolve in her voice, "I don't know if I'll ever be the same as I was before, but I'm okay with that." Frank looked across at her, his smile wide. "You're more than okay, Danny. You're stronger than ever." Mike nodded in accord. "And we'll be right here, every step of the way." Danielle grinned, a genuine, deep smile that reached her eyes.